Hey folks, good morning, happy Friday, and welcome to your December 13th edition of Forecasting Space with me, your host, Chase Wilson. This is a segment where we go over every week the upcoming launches for the next 7 days out of the continental United States. Interesting space news, if there was any, over the last week, which there always is, let's be real here. And at the end, I go over one of my favorite photos. You know, there's so many, awesome stuff from James Webb Hubble, so we're gonna have a lot to go over there. But you know what, let's just go ahead and start with the next 7 days of launches out of the United States. First on the chopping block is Starlink Group 11-2. This is at 1:10 p.m. today, so in just a few hours, that's going to be out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. They're launching south. We're going to see that Falcon 9 first stage land on, of course, I Still Love You, which is one of their drone ships. And just a few hours later, we actually see a smaller rocket, very much smaller rocket from Electron. This is Rocket Lab's Electron rocket launching HASTE, which is the Hypersonic Accelerator Suborbital Test Electron mission for an unknown customer out of Launch Complex 2 there in Virginia's Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. And that's kind of interesting, right? This is going to be suborbital, so it's not going to orbit. It will go to space, but it's coming down in a hurry. That's what the Hypersonic Accelerator thing means. And actually, just 30 minutes later, we see another launch out of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, GPS 310 on a Falcon 9 Block 5. So finally, we're starting to see these more, non-Starlink launches picking up there out of both the west and east coast. This is going to be a Falcon 9 that's going to land on a shortfall of gravitas off the coast there. Of course, that's going to be in the evening, so you might not see quite as much, but as the rockets accelerate into the upper atmosphere and even into space, well, sunset hasn't fully set, 200 miles up, so keep an eye on that. That might be quite a show. There's a gap for a few days, but on Sunday, December 15th at 2:58 p.m., we see another Falcon 9 launch of the O3B mPOWER 7 and 8 launches, which are the second generation satellites for the SES-owned O3B networks. Again, that's at 2:58 p.m., also on a Falcon 9, landing on their autonomous spaceport drone ship off the coast. And then just a few hours later in the early morning hours of Monday, this is gonna be one of those launches probably where you wanna watch it later in the morning when you wake up instead of staying up till 3:33 a.m. when it launches, but this is going to be an NROL 149, right? So NROL, that is the National Reconnaissance Office launch number 149. So this is actually a confidential government payload, which typically these have been on United Launch Alliance rockets, such as the Delta IV, Delta IV Heavy, but as those systems have retired, the contracts have been kind of getting picked up by SpaceX. So that'll be sure to be interesting over the next few days. We'll keep an eye on those. One final launch out of the continental United States is actually a few days later. This is on Tuesday, December 17th at 9:38 p.m. Central Time. This is Astranus Block 2, also on a Falcon 9, launching out of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And then outside that, not much going on in the next 7 days. And that concludes our launches here from CONUS here over the next 7 days. Very interesting updates here on space sector here as far as news is concerned because, well, Ingenuity. We had that crash earlier this year, which was that first kind of drone flight on Mars. Finally, NASA actually has released an accident investigation report into exactly what happened. So let's dive into it and see what happened with beautiful little Ingenuity. For context, this started on Flight 72 much earlier in the year as this little drone Ingenuity, which is of sorts kind of the first helicopter ever to be on another planet, right? An awesome feat in its own right. Flight 72 is kind of insane because 72 flights is just almost unbelievable. Nevertheless, this was in a region of where it landed, which was Jezero Crater, filled with kind of nothing, relatively featureless sand ripples and steep, featureless zones of surface, right? And that's bad because, well, the visual system actually uses reference points of textures on the ground, rocks, cliff faces, things like that. And whenever you have these featureless zones, well, the helicopter gets kind of askew. So one of these navigation system's main requirements was to provide velocity estimates that would help it land and get its vertical and horizontal velocities just right. And around 20 seconds after takeoff, the navigation system just couldn't find any surface features to track. And it looks like what happened was, as it was coming down, it had high horizontal velocities at touchdown, so that is to say in the x-axis, right? And looks like the hard impact on the sand ripple slope actually caused Ingenuity to pitch and roll, and these rapid attitude changes resulted in the lows on the fast rotating rotor blades to break because it was beyond their design limits. And in fact, the damaged blades caused an excessive vibration in the rotor system, which ripped the remainder of one of the blades from its roots and generated an excessive power demand, and that actually caused it to lose communications. And, well, that's kind of it, right? That's all she wrote for Ingenuity, so it seemed. Now, it's not going to be flying again, right? That much is for sure. However, representing meteorologists here, I know my ilk will love this. The helicopter now beams weather and avionics type test data to Perseverance rover, which was what dropped it off there on Mars about once a week. So we're starting to see some meteorological stations being deployed on Mars, so to speak. So unfortunately, even though it is grounded permanently, we're going to still see some useful data come out of this. And honestly, like I said at the beginning of this, the fact that it got to 72 flights is just absolutely remarkable. I don't think anybody was expecting it to last quite so long, but it's definitely had a good life. And hey, it's not over yet, right? Even though it's not flying, like I said, we're getting some Martian weather there. Maybe I'll have to start a Martian weather segment every week, right? That would certainly be interesting. In other news, we are creeping closer and closer to Blue Origin's launch of their New Glenn rocket. Now, they're targeting sometime in December, at least if things go well. We don't have an exact date yet, but this is a sector that you're going to want to watch because a lot of the parts and components of this rocket are kind of homegrown to the Tennessee Valley, right? Those Blue Origin engines, well, if you live in Huntsville like I do, you definitely have seen those shipments in and out of that ginormous factory and research park. These are coming out of the Rocket City, being shipped there, and also testing all the time in Huntsville. You hear these ginormous rattling vibrations for 6, 7, 8 minutes. This is all in pursuit of a December launch date for New Glenn. This is going to be a competitor to Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. We'll see if it gets off the ground before the new year, but if not, it's probably going to be in January. Just want to mention this before we move on to Photo of the Week because I've been very excited for this launch. Of course, like I said, it being homegrown gives me a certain sense of pride, even though I'm somewhat of a SpaceX fanboy, I'll admit that. Blue Origin is doing some pretty amazing things. So let's keep an eye on this sector. New Glenn might very well launch in December pending regulatory approval. Keep a very close eye down here. That concludes interesting space news for the week. Now let's go over a photo of the week, and we're going to continue our tour of the solar system with this one. Last week we were looking at Jupiter from James Webb. This week we are looking a little bit further out at Uranus. This photo from Webb is absolutely remarkable. So many details to pick apart here. We actually have a few little helpful pointers here. You can see actually the polar cap of Uranus, which is actually tilted in a different direction. So we're actually seeing sort of the top of it with these beautiful cloud tops. There's storms there along those cloud tops are very visible. Look at those rings too. They really stick out in the infrared. They're not quite as easy to see in visible light, at least at first glance, but the temperature differences here in the rings, in fact, you can kind of see the innermost ring there, the zeta ring. You know, those are incredible, right? We see a lot of friction, a lot of heat from these colliding particles here. And by the way, look there, you see on the left limb of Uranus, that is actually a star behind it. So there's a lot of little details here that are incredible. And by the way, that storm there is pretty fierce. You see those cloud tops there, those slightly brighter cloud tops. That's an intense storm. I don't think we would like that here. Those winds can get up to 600 miles an hour. So they're kind of the most intense winds that you'll be seeing pretty much anywhere in the solar system, you know, outside of the other gas giants of Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn. I mean, imagine seeing a hurricane in the United States at 600 miles an hour. Could you imagine just how insane that would be? Yeah, let's be glad this is on Uranus, not over here on our home planet of Earth. But this is one of the most incredible ones because you can really just see the symmetry of those rings. Just imagine if Earth had rings. Now that I could get behind. That would truly be a spectacle to behold. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Forecasting Space. Be sure to tune in next Friday for more on the upcoming launches, space news, and Photo of the Week. I'll talk to you then.